Welcome everybody to another episode of Oddly Specific Pop, the fastest growing podcast in all of YouTube, all of Spotify, all of iTunes. We are in all the platforms, AJ.
We're everywhere. We are a platform.
If you are new here, hello. But if you're coming back, welcome back. See what
Welcome.
happens. See what happens if you subscribe to our podcast. You get another extra greeting from us.
Yes.
Incentive.
All 7 of you. The baker's half dozen.
We'll get them back, AJ. I sent them flowers,
man.
chocolates, personalized tweets. We'll get
Chocolate turtles.
Well, not in the budget. We're a skeleton crew around here nowadays.
That's true. That's true.
We had to get rid of our
intern
office
anymore.
Yeah, we had to get rid of our office space.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're in separate offices. We recorded for a year in the same office, and then now this is new to us.
Yeah,
remote podcast.
Yeah, not at all something that we're used to. Have no idea how this works.
Yeah.
It's been a wild ride. So I'll see you next summer. Never change, and
keep in
TTYL.
It's so generic, AJ. I feel like you should have written something better in my yearbook, but we'll talk about that off air.
I'm sorry. Okay, that's fair. So how are you doing, Lou?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
Same.
Same old.
Same old. Today is a Thursday, I think.
Is it?
I don't know. They all blend together.
Don't they ever, AJ? Don't they ever? But hey, as you all know from the title of this video or this podcast, because like I said, we're everywhere now. You can't escape us. We are going to be talking about an adaptation. I think it's like the third adaptation of this book into live action movie, Little Women, right?
Yes.
By Louisa May Alcott.
That is correct.
The author. And this one was or is directed by
Greta Gerwig.
Greta Gerwig. And this movie, AJ, was not on my radar at all because I didn't have like a strong attachment to the book at all, or even to the adaptations. I've always heard about it, and my wife is very fond of this book, so we have a copy of it. So my knowledge of this movie was that we have a book, and that's in my shelf, and that's really pretty. But that's the most that I've known about it. But when I saw this, that it was coming out, I was a little intrigued just based on the cast, because I wasn't really very familiar with Greta Gerwig at all. I know this is her second film that she's directed that's like around big budget, right? Bigger,
right? Second feature,
more mainstream, yeah. So I knew just about the cast, but not so much about the director. So were you familiar with either Greta Gerwig or Little Women?
No, I mean, I was familiar of at least one of the adaptations existing. That's the Winona Ryder one from the 90s. I remember when it was released. And I want to say we saw part of that. The thing was, like, in that period, Winona Ryder had actually ended up in 2 adaptations of period like American literature that it's not quite the same. So like Little Women takes place in the 19th century, so it's like just after or around the Civil War, and then Winona Ryder was also in an adaptation of The Crucible with Daniel Day-Lewis and Demi Moore, I believe. Oh wait, am I thinking The Scarlet Letter? If it's Demi Moore, no, I'm almost positive it was The Crucible. I just know Winona Ryder was in The Crucible, and I'm pretty sure it was Daniel Day-Lewis. Demi Moore, might be wrong. And so anyway, like I knew that there was this period of time where there were like films with Winona Ryder, and obviously she is pretty big in that period of time, and that she had landed these 2 things. And so I was familiar with that. So I think of Winona Ryder in a lot of like period pieces, and so that's what I knew. I'm a big fan of Greta Gerwig, so I was instantly really going to be interested in checking this out. I believed my wife, and it turned out to be right, that she had read Little Women and had some interest and fascination in that. So that was sort of like my in, and I was really grateful because it sounded like it was getting fantastic reviews.
Hmm.
But my main hook was Greta Gerwig. I'd seen her first in Frances Ha, which it's just really a delightful performance, a wonderful, wonderful story. Then a couple of years ago, I'd watched Lady Bird, and so that's the sort of the jump from Lady Bird to this makes a lot of sense for for folks who'd seen Lady Bird because if you're not familiar, Saoirse Ronan and Timothée Chalamet both are involved in this and were sort of leads in Lady Bird. And Lucas Hedges was in Lady Bird. Lady Bird is fantastic. You guys, if you haven't seen it yet, go back and watch it. In fact, kind of in anticipation of recording this episode, I decided to throw Lady Bird on, also because Lady Bird just makes me feel good. It's a very tender movie
Hmm.
in a lot of ways, and so I was able to sort of throw that on, and it still really holds up. It's a phenomenal film. So yeah, that was what got me, and I'm a big fan of Greta Gerwig and excited to sort of see where she goes. So yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, my experience with her was the opposite. This was my first kind of exposure to Greta Gerwig and her writing and her directing. And so I went backwards. I went Little Women to Lady Bird.
Mhm.
And yeah, so I already knew she could direct like beautifully. And, going back to that movie, like it was just, solidified that, she's just a great director. But
Mhm.
for those of you who are not as familiar with this adaptation, Little Women is a coming of age drama written and directed by Greta Gerwig, and it is the seventh film adaptation of the 1968 novel of the same name
Wow.
by Louisa
7.
May Alcott. Yes, the movie stars Emma Watson, Florence Pugh,
Florence.
Elise,
Ooh.
Eliza, Scanlen, Saoirse Ronan, Saoirse. I always have really hard trouble pronouncing her name
Well, it's
because
because
I
it's
read it.
Gaelic.
Yeah, I read it and
Yeah.
then it throws me off.
I used to pronounce it Soiris. Um, but
Oh,
it's
French.
yeah, it's Saoirse. Like I've told you, like I've there's a soccer player on the team that I follow who's
Hmm.
Irish, and his name is Kevin Kelleher. But if you were to sort of try and phonetically say it, it would come out like Cowman.
Hmm.
There's no V in that anywhere, but it's Kevin. Or
I'll
I
get it
think it's technically
eventually,
there's a
AJ.
soft W like Quevin. I don't know. So
I'll get it
um
eventually. Saoirse Ronan, Laura Dern, Timothy Charlemagne, Meryl Streep, and the list goes on. It's a kind of a star-studded cast, if you ask me. Uh,
there's a heck of a cameo at the end.
so we'll just start with like general thoughts for this movie. And like I said, I went in it because my wife and her mom, they're very big fans of Little Women, so they really wanted to check this movie out. And I saw the trailers and everything, and I thought it looked great, right, just by seeing the trailer. So I was like, it's not really something that was on my radar, but I'm gonna check it out because I hear really great things about the director and I hear really great things about the cast. So I'm gonna check it out. And yeah, it was not disappointed at all. If anything, I was like I really really enjoyed this movie
Mm,
for many aspects of it because it's such a warm movie.
mhm,
Just not just based on the story, but the way the characters are handled and it's beautifully shot. Um, just all around this movie, just from start to finish. I thought it was going to be one of those like slow burns, and I thought, okay, parts of it I'll enjoy, but I just found myself enjoying the entire movie, especially since I knew nothing about the story. I think it really played itself well to me because I didn't know anything about it, so I was able to enjoy the story with fresh eyes, and I just thought it was greatly written. I know that Greta Gerwig did a little bit some tweaking here and there with the script and the way that the story is told from the book and the other adaptations. So I really really enjoyed that aspect of it, just because it felt fresh, even though it's kind of technically a period piece, sometimes those feel stuffy to me. They feel
Mhm.
like okay, I get it. Everybody in the past was boring. That's the way it feels like, or like that. Hollywood thinks that, that people from the past tend to be a little more slow. And even though this movie felt like it was brought up to like the new ways of making movies, it still felt very um, in the period. It didn't feel like it was like 2020 dialogue or 2019 dialogue with like 1800s people. If you get what I mean.
Yeah, yeah. I think that the sort of the way that it was presented allowed for it to feel less like, oh man, I'm trying to think of like a period piece where it feels like, have you ever seen have you ever seen this is me because I actually think it's a fantastic he's really fantastic at adapting these, but have you ever seen any of Kenneth Branagh's Shakespeare adaptations for film, like
I think so. I
Hamlet
mean, it's been
or
so long.
A Midsummer Night's Dream?
Yeah, it's been so long.
So like the thing about Kenneth Branagh's sort of adaptations is what makes them great is that I think that he's able to draw out sort of thematic elements in there, but he very much sticks to sort of like the Shakespearean mode because
Hmm.
he really is a scholar or a student of Shakespeare. And so when I think of sort of things that might turn people off from period pieces, it's usually that. Like I think a lot of people expect folks to sort of take this dialogue, which is using archaic language, and then sort of like not trip over it, or it sort of feels like it's obvious and just sitting there. And what I thought
Hmm.
was really wonderful about Greta Gerwig's adaptation is that she was able to tease out performances from everyone else that made the dialogue seem natural. I don't believe
Yeah.
she inserted a lot of sort of modern phrasing or anything like that, but the deliveries were modern, which I thought
Hmm.
was really really great. And I think that that's part of coaching, and that's also part of just, man, what a quality cast. I also haven't read the book, and I recognize how ironic it is to have two men talking about Little Women. Um, yeah, I found this movie to be incredibly, incredibly charming. It was such a wonderful, wonderful film to watch, and especially so, I think I caught it in early February. Yeah, actually, I think it was like an anniversary date for me and my wife, and may have been the last film I've watched in theaters, which is great because that's a great film to sort of go out on. It really is sort of exquisitely shot, and Greta Gerwig's sensibilities and eye for image is really really terrific. I go back to Lady Bird, and the montage scenes driving through Sacramento are absolutely beautiful. Um, and so you get a lot of that same sort of command of the camera, sort of the this feel for creating space, and just lining up just wonderful, wonderful and beautiful images. But then you also tie that with um, what Greta Gerwig has shown in Lady Bird, and then also just in the way that she performs as an actress. This love for sort of repartee and sort of like pacey dialogue, and she manages to bring that into this too. So yeah, it definitely felt alive and a lot less stuffy. And I think that I'd chalk a lot of that up to what Greta Gerwig did.
Hmm. And what's interesting about that too, because I was watching the behind the scenes of, like I always do for this movie, she was talking about how even though she adapted the movie, she adapted the screenplay. A lot of the dialogue she kept in, and all the powerful stuff that goes into the script, they're direct quotes from the book. So she was
Right.
saying like, even though it feels like I brought it up to speed to what we are, is like the message is still there. It's not my movie. It's still it's the most important part of this is that it sticks to the source material, that the message of the actual book. And I mean, and you can tell that, Greta Gerwig really, really wanted to pay an homage to this book and to kind of give it that sense of like, it's not about me. This is not my movie. It's about bringing this book to the screen again, but not so much as rewriting it.
Yeah, I do think though one of the interesting ways that she sort of asserts herself, and this could be total projection on my part, but an observation again, because I've never read the book, but an observation that I got from sort of listening to other folks doing their reviews on this, specifically I believe it was NPR's Pop Culture Happy Hour who mentioned this. They talked about how this adaptation was pretty revolutionary in the way that it created, through the way that it decided to cut and reorder some of the scenes, because Little Women is shot out of, or yeah, presented to you out of chronology. You're sort
Hmm.
of drifting back and forth in time, so it's a really nice set, sort of changing back and forth as well. But what that sort of allowed was it allowed you to sort of see an evolutionary or redemptive arc for, is it Amy? Um, God, I can't remember. It's Florence Pugh's character. I forget
Yeah, it's
what the
Amy.
Amy. So it's a redemptive arc for Amy, and according to sort of what I'd heard on that episode of NPR Pop Culture Happy Hour, it seems like Amy is sort of generally hard to love in the book. And I'll tell you, it was generally hard to enjoy her in the first
Hmm.
three quarters of this film. But I think that there are two things. First, Greta Gerwig clearly loves this character, and I think that that shows in the treatment of that character, because you don't cut a movie, you don't cut the source material in this way unless you have some sort of deeper understanding and connection to that character, right? And then the second thing is that Florence Pugh imbues her, this character, with such a wonderful tenacity and charisma with her performance, that I think it's really impossible for you to not get on board when it finally happens. And so it's two things. There are two like moments of genius, but I think that that's sort of where I'd say that, um, yes, there's a lot of, I think, getting out of the way that makes for a successful adaptation. But I think that what was really great in this was that Greta Gerwig knew, and really comprehended the thematic stuff, and then took her big swing and it landed, with Amy. Because I thought that that entire thing, like I could start to see it happening, and there was a part of me that was kind of like, I don't know if I like Joe with Timothée Chalamet. I forget what his character's name is. I don't know if I like them together, but I also kind of want them both to be happy. And then what is up with Amy and Timothée Chalamet? And so it was just kind of like all this stuff, and I was like getting worried. And then I just realized, no, like it could work for these two because they built enough of both of their characters to fit into this
Hmm.
like moment together. And you could find a way to be, to hold those sort of complex emotions, to be both outraged on behalf of Joe in that moment, while also recognizing that maybe for everyone they all dodged a bullet and this was the way it had to end up, right? And so yeah, I thought that that was maybe the one aspect of it that I was just like, oh, this is interesting. And um I don't know, like I look at some other great adaptations and I don't know if I'd have the courage that Greta Gerwig had to make that call, because that's a bold choice to make, for a book that's as well regarded as uh, Little Women, and also to sort of like say, hey, maybe we got it wrong here with this particular character. They're not all
Hmm.
bad. Like that's a that's a choice, and I loved it.
Yeah. No, yeah, I agree with that. And I mean, and since we're talking about the cast, let's just hit on the cast because I thought, well, here's an interesting tidbit, AJ. So the character of let me see, who was it? Meg, who is played by Emma Stone. I mean, Emma Watson wasn't originally set to be played by Emma Stone, but she
Oh,
had to drop out based on a scheduling conflict.
hmm,
So I find
interesting.
that really interesting because I am I'm torn because I'm not the biggest fan of Emma Watson, but I thought she did okay in this, and
Yeah.
I don't know if Emma Stone would have done better in this role. Um, yeah, I don't know. I thought that was interesting because in a way I could see that, but in another sense, like maybe Emma Watson was the right call. I don't know. I just thought it was interesting that the change.
Yeah, I didn't know that, and I mean, I that's yeah, that's interesting now that you think about it, because my brain's really stuck on um Emma Watson's performance. 'Cause I tend to think that Emma Watson's not half bad as an actress. I think that this role actually benefits from being kind of understated.
Hmm.
Like, um it's not that I've watched a ton of movies with Emma Watson in it. I think maybe I've only seen 3 or 4. So I'm not like a student of her acting style, but I think that what I've heard as a critique of hers is that um she kind of plays distant a little bit, like it may be a little too interior for some folks, but I thought that
Hmm.
what she was that sort of like knack or tendency to do that worked fine here, because it really built a sense of nobility for Meg,
Hmm.
which I think you kind of need to have for that character. um I feel like Emma Stone would have given you, um, man, I don't know. I think that she would have given you maybe a more open Meg, but then you kind of lose that moment, because I think part of it is that the tension that ratchets like in Meg's side story is built partially by sort of being aloof,
Hmm.
um and so I don't know if Emma Stone gives you the same, but again, I'm not an acting coach either, so I don't know.
Right.
That's interesting, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So same here. I don't know. Like I said, I don't know what to think, but based on the performances that I've seen from Emma Watson in other movies, I know that she's kind of best in an ensemble than she is in like a leading role. So if in a sense, I'm kind of glad that they went with Emma Watson instead of Emma Stone because I see Emma Stone more of like in leading roles than anything else, and so I don't know how that dynamic would have worked with
Mm,
Saoirse
mm,
Ronan because she's also like everything that she's in, she kind of just pops on the screen. She's so good with
mhm,
everything that she does. So I don't know because even Florence Pugh, she was great in this too. So I mean, let's just talk
mhm,
about the whole cast. I thought the Little Women, the main four roles. I think even with Emma Watson, who I'm not the most fond of in a lot of roles. I really like her in the Harry Potter series. Like I don't think anybody else could play Hermione, but in everything else, it's kind of forgettable, especially in the bigger movies. I haven't been the biggest fan of her performances, but I think a part of this ensemble, I think she really played well with the other characters, really really well. Saoirse Ronan as Joe was really really good, and this, like I said, this was my first kind of exposure to her
mhm.
in the movies, and you can just like it's something to watch. It's one of those performances or actresses that is gonna have like a long career, and you're just kind
Yeah,
of seeing like the beginning of it. It feels like same
yeah.
thing with Timothy Chalamet. I think the same thing with him. Like this is like the infancy, like. Christian Bale, because he played, I think he played Laurie in the old movie.
Oh, that's
So
right. Yeah.
yeah, so like it's the same thing. Like that he's going places. I mean, I don't know how his career is going to play out, but it's kind of like the starting point of his career. So even up to Timothée Chalamet in this movie, that was my first exposure. I knew his name because everyone just always talks about Timothée Chalamet online everywhere. So I knew him, just knew the name. So this is like my first time I paid attention, and I thought he did great in his role as Laurie. Um, there was points that in this movie that kind of took me off because it kind of jumps back and forth in different points in their life, and everybody kind of does really well of going back and forth between a young version of their character and an older version of their
Mhm.
character. And Timothée Chalamet just has that really young face. So like it was kind of distracting at points, but I mean his performance was so good you kind of forget about it. But it was just
Mhm.
so funny because he looks 16 all the time, even though he's playing an older version of Laurie, at different points in the movie. But I think with every actor, they kind of age accordingly. Who is another Leonardo DiCaprio? He looked super young for so long, and now he's like an old man out of nowhere. So
Well, not quite, but yes, he suddenly does not look like he's eternally 18. He just looks like he's eternally 30.
yeah.
He's in that space, and I imagine Timothy Chalamet is gonna end up in a similar boat. It's really interesting because I I hadn't seen, or I haven't seen, Call Me by Your Name, not yet, and that was the Timothy Chalamet performance that everyone raves about. Um, but I when I saw him in Lady Bird, it was like, "Oh, I get it. I get it. This kid this kid's just something," you know? And I mean,
Hmm.
you put him next to Saoirse Ronan, and my gosh, it's just fireworks, you know? Like, I can't say enough about those 2 leads in particular. Like, Saoirse Ronan is, she's a force of nature when she's on screen. She eats up just so much of the camera in a good way, you know. Like, I
Hmm.
think that there's some people, like someone had mentioned today, because they were talking about Marriage Story, and one of the reasons why they were avoiding it was that they got the impression that a lot of it hinged on sort of like these big scenes that, like, and I understand why some people will look at big scenes and will be like, oh yeah, you know, they deserve an Oscar. But I usually like sort of like more quiet performances, you know.
Hmm.
And so I don't think that that's what Saoirse Ronan does. Like, she's not out there like screaming to scream. It's just that she can bring so much um expression from like the smallest little tick, you know, on her face, that it just, you're there. And she inhabits these roles in ways that I don't know, I feel like it's really special. And then
Hmm.
Timothy Chalamet, then sort of like sitting opposite from her, is a very generous performer, you know. And I think that yeah, I've done like one I've done 2 plays in my life, like actual plays, and then, you know, had like auditioned for like 3, and so, like, I'm not like a studied, you know, actor, but, um, as someone who's been in that role, it's really nice when you've got, actors who are very giving, you know,
Hmm.
for whom it's not about like winning a scene, because sometimes you'll get that, but
Yeah.
rather it's about working in tandem. And so I feel like those 2 just really, really work well together. Um, and then Florence Pugh, I'd never seen her before. I know she's in Midsummer. I haven't seen Midsummer yet, mostly because I'm still getting over the scare of Hereditary. And I've heard all sorts of weird stuff about Midsummer, so I'm just not ready to do it yet. But Florence Pugh was just, oh man, I feel like in order to be like on screen with the likes of Saoirse Ronan, and then, you know, you mentioned Laura Dern and Meryl Streep, you know, in this film,
Hmm.
like, you're talking about like some very, very, very uh well regarded actresses like in the field doing it now. You know, like
Hmm.
this isn't just anyone. And so Florence Pugh just being able to sort of like duke it out and hold her own, I thought was beautiful. I
Yeah,
don't know, man. I have no complaints about the women in the cast and
yeah,
about Timothée Chalamet. It's the one casting call that I am a little bit like
wait,
about is
can
not
i
a
can I
complaint.
guess?
Yeah,
Is it is it Bob Odenkirk?
it is Bob Odenkirk. Yeah. Because the
Well,
minute he shows up, I couldn't stop thinking that it was Bob
same
Odenkirk.
here. Yeah. Well,
It was
because
so hilarious.
when he showed up, I was like, "Hey, that's Bob Odenkirk." And the whole movie, the rest of the movie, I was like, "No, he's doing pretty good." And I
Yeah,
think he's a great actor. Like
he is. He is.
nothing wrong about his performance. It was a
No,
little distracting for some reason. Like
right,
when Meryl Streep showed up, like I totally forgot that it was Meryl Streep, and it was just on March,
right.
and that that was it. But when he showed up, it was just the whole movie. He was there.
I kept waiting for him to be like when he played that character in The Office, and he was Pam's potential new
Yeah.
boss. I just that I love Bob Odenkirk, and so like it wasn't like anything that he did. I think it's just that because I only ever see Bob Odenkirk in a very specific light.
Hmm.
Um, so it was a me problem, not a you problem, but it was something that kind of like stood out to me, and I was like, huh,
Yeah.
I I wasn't expecting that at all.
You know, the interesting part of this whole cast, to me, it feels like 10, 20 years from now, and people think about this movie, they're like, remember when Saoirse Ronan and Florence Pugh and Timothée Chalamet were in the same movie? Because I
Mhm.
feel like they have just very bright careers in front of them.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like for I mean, maybe Florence Pugh more than Chalamet and
Hmm.
Ronan, but I feel like those three, I feel like you're gonna look back at this movie and think to yourself like, what a cast. I mean,
Yeah.
like I came out of this and I could not stop thinking about how wonderful it was to finally see Laura Dern in a role that allowed her to sort of like play on the best aspects of her, what I imagine her character to be. Like not
Hmm.
like her actual interior character, like
Hmm.
she seems very flinty, but also very tender, incredibly smart, thoroughly charming. Like I just, like she's like amazing to me. And maybe it's cuz like I grew up loving Jurassic Park and just in love with her, Dr. Ellie Sattler, in
Hmm.
that movie. But when I saw her here, and I think the most recent film beyond that was what, The Last Jedi. Um, like I always was like thinking to myself like, man, I could do with more Laura Dern in my life. And to see her just like really handle this role with such, I don't know, grace and skill and finesse. I just thought it was perfect for her, and I loved it. And I feel like that's that's for me like a personal highlight that I'll be able to like go back to when I go back and be like, this movie got Laura Dern. This is the perfect Laura Dern role for me.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
this is, I could watch her do this role forever. Give me a spin-off movie with that role.
And we
I'm
talked about
in.
it last week with the Oscar episode where she got nominated for Best Supporting Actress for Marriage Story, but she didn't get nominated for this,
Mhm.
which I could not. Having watched both of those movies, like it's night and day. Like this role was made for Laura Dern, and like I said, I'm not the biggest fan of Laura Dern, but I think after this movie, going back to those other movies, I think I am now because I
Mhm.
know how much range she has, and like I said, this role feels like it was made for her, and yeah, so I 100% agree, and I was so just like when Saoirse Ronan was on the screen, the same thing when Laura Dern was on the screen. It felt very, you wanted to pay attention even more closely when they were on the screen. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I agree. She's just really, really. charismatic and entrancing. I don't know. I love Laura Dern.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing else I could say about this movie. It's it's beautifully acted, beautifully shot, beautifully directed, and having watched this one, then Lady Bird, I just can't wait to see the next movie that she does because you can tell she's a great director, she's a great writer. So I'm super excited to see where her career takes her after this because two home runs, like we're gonna go from here.
Yeah, for me, I think that I'm obviously just in the bag for anything that Greta Gerwig does. Excited, especially if she decides to bring back Saoirse Ronan and Timothée Chalamet. Do it, I'm in. I think for me, the biggest takeaway here is sort of the value of having a filmmaker that that can really comprehend and own the thematic and sort of narrative elements of any specific source material, like someone who really understands and inhabits this world and its characters. um because we talked last week, or last episode that was released was um or a couple episodes ago. I can't remember. We are recording a lot of these out of order. So, but the when we were talking about the rise of Skywalker, um, we one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is how even with all this source material or material to draw from, as you're building your world, it's clear that some of the people that are helming these projects just don't know what these characters mean, what the actual thematic thrust of the entire saga is about, or the various thematic thrusts of the saga. And so you kind of end up with like these really hollow shells of nothing. I think the Rise of Skywalker. I think of Zack Snyder's Man of Steel, which wasn't bad, but also was definitely not good. And then Batman versus Superman and even Justice League. Like
Hmm.
these directors have a sense of scale and have a sense for image, and maybe have a sense for sort of like how to provide you with a turn or give you a twist or whatever. But what I think sets those works apart, and something like this, which Greta Gerwig did, and like we had mentioned earlier, she takes a pretty big liberty,
Hmm.
a pretty big risk with the narrative, to get you to where you are. And I think that for me, what sets them apart is that Greta Gerwig understood what made this story tick. When she
Hmm.
understood the themes, she understood the point of the story, and thus she understood what role these characters all played in driving the narrative and shaping sort of the environment that you're inhabiting. um, I think that's my big takeaway from this film, is that this is what happens when you're in the hands of someone who understands how to comprehend story in general.
Hmm.
Like when they're reading this story, they don't take the weirdest detail and make that the whole thing. Like
Hmm.
they understand the whole point. And so I'm hoping that as we sort of, in previous episodes have talked about this kind of like shrinking reality of entirely original scripts. I think that if we are going to do a bunch of adaptations, which I think is kind of the way of the world right now, I hope that you have quality auteurs who understand the stories that they're trying to bring to life.
Hmm.
Because this isn't a prime example of what happens when you do that. Because you can take a bold risk like Greta Gerwig did, and it'll pay off because you trust the audience. You also trust the source material, and it'll do the
Hmm.
work. So yeah, that's my big takeaway from
Yeah.
this film.
No, 100%, I agree. I mean, especially since you see all these blockbusters and these big budget directors. They some of them they tend to focus so much of like having moments in their films
Hmm.
and not so much about the way the story flows and how the script flows and how the way that your actors are performing and all that stuff. And even just because you're doing an adaptation of a book or you're doing a smaller scale movie that's focused on a story doesn't mean you sacrifice any of those things. Because I wanted to make sure that I looked it up because the cinematography in this movie is also insanely good. And the
Hmm.
cinematographer was Yorick Leisseau, and he's a French cinematographer. And this movie just looks beautiful too. The choices that they made. I mean, in this movie they chose to shoot it in film again because a lot of the stuff now is shot in digital. They chose specifically to choose to shoot in film because it has a certain look that you just can't replicate with regular film. And these are the type of choices that filmmakers who truly care about their craft make,
Hmm.
just to kind of
Hmm.
elevate the story. Because most people won't notice whether it's shot on digital or in film, but it's these type of decisions that directors and cinematographers make that really make you appreciate the effort they put into their craft.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. It's such a beautiful film. I think a lot about the scenes in London. They were absolutely gorgeous and stunning. So yeah, no, I agree. This is a
Hmm.
quality film, top to bottom.
Oh yeah, 100%. There
Yeah,
you go.
there it is. There it is. That is our take on Little Women. So that closes up that segment and brings us to our favorite segment every week, which is what is bringing you joy, Lou. What is bringing you joy this week?
What's bringing me joy this week is actually a band we've actually touched on last year for the podcast, the 1975. They're releasing a new record, I believe late May. I think that's when
Mm,
it's officially coming out. And they've released singles up to now. I think they're up to 4 singles. The latest single was released yesterday as of recording this episode called Guys. And
mm,
I think every single track that I've heard makes me even more excited for the full length album because
mm,
everything that I've seen, it's exactly what the last record brought, and then just kind of take it up a notch and just kind of continued on to it. And every
mm,
single song is so unique, even though
mm,
it's within the same palette of the record. It's just beautifully written songs again. And I'm a big fan of like that 80s synth sound that they do, and with their like glimmery guitars. And I think every track really shows you what they're gonna bring with the full length album. I think it should be a little different, but if it's somewhat the same from the last one, I wouldn't mind that either because just based on the tracks that were released right now, they're so good. And I think I sent you the link earlier today. And the funny thing about this song is if you only listen to the music and then you kind of sort of listen to the lyrics, it sounds like a love song. But then when you listen closely, it's a love song to your bros who are also in your band. And
yeah.
it's so great. I think it's such a great message and something that I relate to since we were in bands together when we were younger. So yeah, definitely check those out. These tracks, they're all great, and check out their full length album when it drops later this month.
Very nice. Very nice. I don't know if it's accurate to say that when we were younger, because I actually have Benjamin Button disease. So
Oh, that's true.
back when I was in the band, I was much older, and now I am much younger. So
I think you're thinking about long hair, short hair, just because your
mm,
short hair
I don't.
is.
I'm not sure. Maybe.
Agree to disagree.
Maybe. Okay.
So AJ, what's bringing you joy this week?
um, man. I thought I had a couple of things going in, but the thing that I want to talk about is Hayao Miyazaki's My Neighbor Totoro. Uh, so I just watched that last weekend with my family, and this was a film that was shot in or animated in and released in 1986. So I think this is the oldest of the Miyazaki films that I've seen so far. It is quite possibly the most beautiful. My goodness. It is stunning. There are a few scenes and sequences. There's this climactic sequence towards the end of the film, and a lot of it takes place in a Japanese countryside, and just the various angles. First off, the fact that you talked about this before, that like you're watching this character run across the countryside at various camera angles, and so you're seeing the setting sun in various ways. So the sky is depicted differently. So like if you're facing away from the setting sun, sky's still blue, but when you're facing at this particular angle, you're getting this palette of colors, and then you're facing it at this angle and it's this particular set of colors. And so the details are wonderful, but that's what I've come to expect in sort of a Miyazaki film. The renderings of these moments are just so stunning, and I think I remember saying at the time, these scenes are more beautiful than this film has any right to be, because I think that I mean, we talk about Pixar, we talk about Disney, and we always say that they sort of continue to try to push the quality of animation and storytelling. This may be the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I don't know. It is a real whimsical tale. The soundtrack is a banger. Like it's like 80s synth pop. And if you listen to the dubbed version, the person who's singing it, I have no idea who she is, but she's got a wonderful, perfect, like mid to late 80s pop voice, and it's freaking fantastic. I highly recommend, if you've not seen My Neighbor Totoro, you could start with that. I still think Kiki's Delivery Service is my favorite, and I definitely understand why Spirited Away might look more beautiful, but man, My Neighbor Totoro swept me off my feet. It's such a beautiful, beautiful film. So if you've got the time, you can definitely catch all of these on iTunes. Definitely avail yourself of some Miyazaki. It feels good and it looks good. So yeah, that's what's bringing me joy. Yeah.
Nice.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. We appreciate you. Baker's Half Dozen. Please do like and subscribe. Hit the subscribe button wherever it may be.
Yeah, and we're back on iTunes, so if you want to subscribe there, you can also do it there.
And on Spotify, apparently. We're back.
Yeah.
We're back, baby.
We're back everywhere. You can't get rid of us. You tried.
You tried. The MeUndies cartel was trying to silence us, but not no more. We are here for you, and to also try and get that MeUndies money. So please.
Which is the ultimate goal here.
That is the goal. We just want underwear. We just want underwear. All right. Well, thank you all again. Catch y'all next week. Peace out.
Bye.